We bought the.
I saw them walk in and they saw me sitting there. So that might accomplish it. Okay. You've seen each other.
Hi, Fred.
Hi.
I'm Liz.
That's
And this is John.
videographer.
Yeah.
So after I'm long gone, somebody can go back and find the truth
On YouTube.
on YouTube. Out in space.
Out in space. I'm not sure they have YouTube in space yet. Maybe next year.
Hi, long time.
Yeah, nice to see you. Hi. I'm supposed to ride at 9. It starts.
Okay, I think most of you know. Why don't we just quickly introduce yourselves and just tell me a little bit what you know about the subject, or if you don't know anything, just...
I'm Greg Willis. I'm an engineer. I know a lot about everything besides that.
I'm Kumi, and I do Jitsu, and I know a few people with the disease, but yeah, I don't know. I would like to know more about it.
I'm Liz, and I was bit by a tick, and I'm intolerant, so tell me more about it.
And I'm Marcia Sims, and I'm Bernie's wife, and he probably was bitten by a tick. And he's intolerant, yes.
Well, she said, well, yeah, Bernie Hogshash physicist, and I wish I knew nothing about this junk, but I guess I gotta learn.
Yeah, you have to learn. How many people, after this election, feel that it's less likely that we can rely on government for health care and insurance for the health care and the conditions that we're seeing now in modern life? So, I mean, that's been my oh, I forgot to introduce John. You forgot to introduce him.
I'm John. I'm shooting the videos here and going to grad school.
And
That's pretty much it right now.
well, you're a performance artist and,
Mm-hmm.
and interested in health because you're one of the victims of long-term stress, right? Like most of us are. So, what I've been doing this last, how long have I been researching this? When did we, 3-4 months ago, right?
Pardon?
Not the adrenal stress. The adrenal stress was been studying for years. Hey,
Hello.
Well, you just walked in time to introduce yourself.
I'm Doug. Hey, Doug.
Tell everybody what you do.
Climate dynamics and telescope control at splitting my time between Caltech and Stanford and having fun and seeing traffic and
Have you met, actually? Met before?
Very nice.
hey, Doug Pankowski.
Great.
Marcia
Marcia.
Sims.
And I've met everybody else.
Yes, so,
And I'm Celia, so,
which is now outdated,
well, yeah.
so now you're Doug again.
I respond to gluten.
Yeah. So, I debated whether to go to the beach or go to the gluten conference, having thought that I knew enough about gluten and my mild obsessive compulsive disorder made me go to the gluten conference. And so, and it
Peter
turned,
keeps losing out on his beach walks.
now he gets his beach works, he still gets his beach, but not that day. So, the gluten conference by itself meant that everything that I was taught 3 years ago, which I thought would probably be still current, is no longer current. And that anything over 2 years, I'm talking about scientific papers, is no longer valid. So pretty much up into anything over 2 years is outdated already. There's an explosion of knowledge. Adrenal stress we've been studying all my career, and we've been looking at, you know, the hormone family, and a lot of you were here when we went into that in depth, and that is the steroid family. It's all our hormonal system that directs the way we produce energy in our bodies and how we rebuild ourselves, how we rejuvenate, how we, so every day, so if you have a disease or if you have a health problem, it's that system that we have to access to rejuvenate yourself. A lot of people think the hormones are just to make new people, but every day we remake ourselves. And the hormones are the contractors. And the nutrients that you put in your body are what they use to rebuild themselves. So if you put a nutrient in your body that your hormones and your DNA together have no idea what it is because it's something man-made or it's something toxic to you, they're going to rebuild, make mistakes in rebuilding you every day, and you're going to get a degenerative condition. And over time, that can lead to a serious pathology. Okay? So the adrenal stress, the key thing to come away, the takeaway, because I'm going to try to make this practical, and this is not meant to be a summary of all the science, but I think it's the beginning of relooking how the decisions that man made, particularly since the 1930s, have brought us to a place where the majority of modern man can end up disabled and stay alive through drug therapy. That's the economic forecast, and we're rapidly getting there. The economic forecast say that in a decade to a decade and a half, we'll be overwhelmed with disabled people in this country from these degenerative diseases. And the first place they show up is in our hormonal system. So an imbalance, because to produce energy, you produce cortisol, which also is necessary for cognition. And cortisol, one of its primary objectives is catabolism, is to break down the cells. And then the cells release nucleic acids, and they release other substances that are converted into energy. And then you have to replace what you broke down for energy into rebuilding new cells. And those are your anabolic hormones. Those are your testosterone, those are your estrogen, those are your progesterone, those kind of things. So if those same pathways don't dysfunction, then the whole system breaks down. And what modern life is an attempt to adapt to a breakdown on the system, because there is no mechanism in our evolutionary past to deal with long-term stress. There is none. Our whole system is designed for short-term stress. We have a whole very sophisticated regulatory system to allow us to adapt to short-term stress. But then we're supposed to get past the short-term stress, take a deep breath, and have some fun, and have a vacation. But if it persists, there is no mechanism. We're not designed for that. And that's important to understand. So adrenal stress is the first sign of a breakdown in our ability to adapt to life and long-term stress. And when we started looking at hormones very differently than exist in the medical textbooks and in the physiological textbooks, when the scientists that started looking at them differently, is that we looked at hormones, how they communicate with each other, how they signal each other. And so what happens if there's a breakdown in your stress, you'll get communication that's incoherent. Does that make sense?
What do you mean breakdown in your stress?
If you're under long-term stress, where there's too much catabolism, where you're so stressed that you produce too much breakdown and not enough rebuilding, they start signaling each other. It's the way to understand it, and if you can get it, it's one family. They all come from cholesterol. So if you artificially lower your cholesterol, you're taking the raw materials to rebuild your hormonal system, which you need to do every day, and you start getting damage to the nervous system, the brain, which is all made out of cholesterol. So, but how we look at hormones now is not so much are you low or are you high, and you just replace the hormones which are high or low, which is totally wrong. It's so totally opposite of what needs to happen, is how they communicate with each other. And how they communicate with each other is with biological signals. So if they're imbalanced, you get confused, incoherent signaling. Okay, then the next concept that changed is the idea about gluten.
I forgot how you measure the adrenal, is it through blood test?
No, blood tests are inaccurate, because to think of the blood test, what they will tell you is if you had a city and you had 10,000 construction workers in the city, the blood test will tell you how many workers are able to work at a construction site, can be hired. But it won't tell you how many are actually working. You have to use saliva tests, which are unbound, because the regulatory system in our bodies keeps a tight lid on how many actually get to the job site, actually get to the tissues. And to make sure that this hormones are so powerful, to make sure it stays within a very defined limit. Example, estrogen would be the equivalent of a pinch of salt on 180 railroad cars of potato chips, bread trains. That's how minor, because it's so powerful, because estrogen tells your body to build. If you don't want too much building, you'll end up growing things in the wrong place. So the blood tests will only tell you, most of the blood tests, unless you get the unbound. So 97% of the hormones in the blood are bound with protein to keep them in the blood and not out in your body. to regulate it. They're done with protein binding hormone, actually binds them. And so to know what's actually going on in the tissues, what's actually working, you have to test what's unbound. So
And how do you do that?
that's a saliva test.
Saliva test.
Okay. And then if you want to know what's going on in the hormones from the brain, you have to know from the saliva test, but they're very fragile, so there's not many labs that know how to do
Can you
that.
measure cholesterol?
Now, cholesterol you can do in the blood,
Uh-huh.
because cholesterol is not that meaningful.
But when you say brain,
Pituitary.
oh,
Big thing in the regulation is the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and the adrenals. And then the other ones that regulate the thyroid and all the other tissues.
So a high cortisol level isn't necessarily correlated.
Well, a lot of times you get a high, it's a response to stress. You get a high cortisol, that's when, especially at night, that prevents people from rebuilding themselves. Because to rebuild yourself properly, you have to be able to go into deltas.
I'm talking about in terms of blood cortisol level, which is one of the typical indicators, one of the typical markers used.
Well, a lot of the advanced medical centers are now switching to saliva. Emory the university was the first,
Okay.
because the blood wasn't